Once investigators understand the different factors that influence credibility, the next challenge is applying those factors in a consistent and transparent way. This is where a structured credibility matrix becomes valuable. A credibility matrix helps investigators move away from informal judgments or personal impressions and toward a more disciplined, evidence-based approach. It provides a framework for comparing different accounts, documenting the reasons behind credibility decisions, and demonstrating that findings were reached through a logical process rather than subjective opinion. The purpose of a credibility matrix is not to create a mathematical formula that determines who is telling the truth. Human behavior and workplace events are far too complex for that. Instead, the matrix provides a structured method for organizing evidence, identifying strengths and weaknesses in different accounts, and explaining why one version of events is more persuasive than another. A well-designed credibility matrix typically begins by identifying the key credibility factors that will be considered. These may include factors such as motive, consistency, plausibility, corroboration, opportunity to observe events, and reliability of memory. Some advanced investigative approaches expand this into broader frameworks with multiple credibility indicators drawn from workplace arbitration decisions, legal reasoning, and investigative practice. For example, an investigator may consider whether a witness has a reason to intentionally distort information, whether their account remains consistent over time, whether their version aligns with objective evidence, and whether the explanation makes sense within the circumstances of the case. The matrix may also consider the relative strength of different types of evidence. Not all evidence carries the same weight. Direct evidence, such as an admission, an authenticated record, or objective digital evidence, may provide stronger support than indirect or circumstantial information. However, investigators should remember that evidence must always be evaluated within context. A single piece of evidence rarely determines the entire outcome. Credibility is assessed through the combined weight of all relevant information. Some analytical approaches use probability-based methods to help investigators express confidence in different parts of an account. For example, an investigator may consider whether a particular claim is highly supported, uncertain, or contradicted by objective evidence. These approaches can help clarify reasoning, but they should not create a false impression of mathematical certainty. Workplace investigations involve human behavior, and professional judgment remains essential. An equally important part of the credibility matrix is documenting the reasoning behind credibility judgments. A defensible investigation report should not simply state, "The complainant was credible," or "The respondent was not credible." The critical question is, why? The investigator must explain the reasoning pathway that led to the conclusion. For example, was one account preferred because it was supported by contemporaneous emails? Was another account less persuasive because it conflicted with access records, or because important details changed over time? The credibility conclusion should always be connected to specific evidence. Good investigative writing focuses on clear and concise reasoning. Findings should identify the relevant facts, explain the supporting evidence, and show how the evidence connects to the conclusion. The goal is not to criticize a witness, but to explain why one interpretation of the evidence is stronger than another. Maintaining a decision log or investigative reasoning record can also strengthen defensibility. Important decisions such as why additional interviews were conducted, why certain evidence was given greater weight, or why a particular account was considered less reliable should be documented during the investigation. This creates a record of the investigator's analytical process and reduces the risk that decisions appear unexplained after the investigation is complete. Credibility assessment may involve both qualitative and quantitative approaches. Qualitative approaches focus on the content, structure, and context of information. Investigators examine the quality of narratives, the relationship between statements and evidence, and whether explanations are logical and consistent. These approaches are commonly used because workplace investigations often involve complex human interactions that cannot be reduced to numbers. Quantitative approaches use data, probability concepts, or analytical models to support decision-making. In some specialized investigations, statistical methods or data analysis techniques may help identify unusual patterns or assess the likelihood of certain explanations. However, quantitative tools should support, not replace, professional investigative judgment. Finally, a credibility matrix helps promote transparency and consistency. Investigators must apply the same analytical principles regardless of the individuals involved. A senior executive, a long-serving employee, a new employee, or a complainant should all be assessed using the same credibility standards. Consistent methodology helps protect the investigation from claims of bias, unfair treatment, or predetermined outcomes. A useful final check for any credibility assessment is to ask, would this reasoning withstand external review? If the investigator's rationale were examined by management, legal counsel, a regulator, or the public, could the investigator clearly explain why the conclusion was reached? A structured credibility matrix does not eliminate judgment from investigations. Instead, it improves judgment by making the reasoning process visible, consistent, and defensible.